There is a great illusion many fall into, the belief that silence alone is the answer. That if you just stop calling, stop texting, stop reaching out, something will shift. But let me tell you, no contact is just the beginning. What truly shakes a person at their core is not your absence. It's who you become in your absence. Because let's be honest, if you're still sitting in the same energy, waiting, hoping, replaying the past, then you are still connected. You may have cut off communication, but you have not cut off the emotional tether. And that's the only connection that truly matters. You must understand, people don't respond to silence, they respond to energy. The moment you shift your frequency, the moment you detach, not just physically, but emotionally, that's when they feel it. That's when the weight of your absence becomes undeniable. So, what must you do? You must become unrecognizable to the version of you they once knew. You must evolve so profoundly that they can no longer place you in their past. Because when you upgrade yourself, your mindset, your habits, your purpose, you disrupt the very fabric of their perception. And here's the truth. When you reach a level where you no longer crave their validation, when you no longer need them to notice, that's when they notice the most. That's when they begin to wonder, how did I lose my grip? Why do they no longer react? Because you see, people expect you to stay in the loop of longing. They expect you to remain predictable, to be affected, to be waiting. But when you step into your power, when you become so engaged in your own expansion, you don't need to prove your worth. It speaks for itself. So don't just go no contact, go no attachment, no reaction, no dependence. Let your transformation do the talking. And trust me, they will feel it. No contact is often seen as the ultimate revenge, the final word, the power move that will make them realize what they lost. But this is where most people get it wrong. No contact is not the end game. It is only the beginning. It is a strategy, not the destination. If all you do is remove your presence but remain energetically entangled, still checking their social media, still replaying conversations, still hoping they notice your absence, then you are not truly free. You are still living in response to them. And as long as your inner world revolves around their actions, they still have power over you. True transformation happens when you don't just stop reaching out, but when you stop needing to. When your mind is no longer looping in the past, when your emotional state is no longer dictated by whether or not they text back. No contact creates space, but what you fill that space with determines everything. Will you fill it with waiting, with resentment, or will you fill it with growth, with self-mastery, with a version of you that no longer seeks external validation? Silence alone does not create impact. Evolution does. When you shift, when you become someone new, someone who is no longer emotionally bound to the past, they feel that loss in a way no amount of ignoring them ever could. That is when the real power begins. No contact might remove you from their sight, but it is your emotional frequency that determines whether they truly feel your absence. Silence alone does not create an impact if, deep inside, you are still energetically tethered to them. If your mind is consumed by thoughts of them, if your emotions are still dictated by what they do or don't do, then no matter how far you are, they still have access to you. Energy speaks louder than words, louder than silence. People don't just feel the absence of your messages, they feel the shift in your state of being. If you are still in a space of longing, anger, or pain, that emotional charge keeps the connection alive, whether you reach out or not. But the moment you begin to release that attachment, when your energy no longer reaches for them, that is when they start to notice something different. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about genuinely stepping into a place where their actions no longer dictate your emotional state. When you reclaim your inner power, when you no longer vibrate at the frequency of the past, they feel it. They may not understand why, but something shifts. The energetic pull they once had on you dissolves, and suddenly they are the ones questioning, sensing, and wondering. Your emotional frequency is your true leverage. It is not your words, not your silence, not your absence, but your ability to detach, to elevate, to step into a version of yourself that no longer seeks what once felt essential. When you master that, you don't just disappear, you transform. And that transformation is impossible to ignore. Who you were in that relationship is not who you have to remain. The version of you that loved them, longed for them, and perhaps even lost yourself in them was built on past conditioning, old beliefs, and outdated patterns. If you truly want to break free, not just from them, but from the emotional grip they had over you, you must rewire your identity and rewrite the story you've been telling yourself. You see, most people stay stuck in the same cycle because they keep identifying with the past. They still see themselves as the person who wasn't chosen, the person who was hurt, the person who was abandoned. And as long as that identity remains, they will continue to live out the same emotional patterns, even if the relationship is over. The mind does not care about reality. It only follows the narrative you feed it. But here's the truth. You are not that story. You are not your past. You are not the person who was left behind. The moment you decide to rewrite the way you see yourself, everything changes. You shift from being the one who was rejected to being the one who outgrew them, from the one who was left to the one who evolved, from the one who waited for love to the one who became love itself. This is not about pretending. It's about intentionally rebuilding yourself on a new foundation. One where your worth is no longer tied to their validation, where your happiness is no longer dependent on their presence. The moment you detach from the old version of you, they can no longer access you in the way they once did. And that's when the balance of power shifts. Because when they look for you in the places they once found you, emotionally, mentally, energetically, you are no longer there. You have become someone else, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who no longer waits for someone to see their worth because they have already claimed it for themselves. And that is when they feel the real loss, not of your presence, but of the version of you they will never have access to again. Detachment is not about indifference. It's not about pretending you don't care or forcing yourself to move on before you're ready. True detachment is the mastery of your own energy, the ability to exist in complete emotional sovereignty, where no one outside of you holds the power to disturb your inner state. When you are energetically attached to someone, they still occupy space within you. You may have stopped talking, you may have cut all contact, but if your mind is still replaying conversations, if your heart still reacts to their name, if you still seek some form of validation, then you are still tied to them. And as long as that bond exists, they can feel it. Whether consciously or unconsciously, people sense when they still hold an emotional charge in your life. The moment you master energetic detachment, everything shifts. You no longer react, you no longer anticipate, you no longer wait for anything outside of you to give you peace. You take back your power, not by forcing them out of your thoughts, but by dissolving the emotional grip they had on you. And that comes from deep internal work, rewiring your subconscious beliefs, releasing old emotional patterns, and stepping into a version of yourself that is no longer defined by the past. The irony is that when you no longer need their attention, they begin to feel the shift. When you are no longer emotionally tethered to them, they experience the void. The same energetic pull they once had over you disappears, and in its place, there is silence. Not just physical silence, but emotional silence. That is what people truly feel. the absence of your energy, your thoughts, your emotional investment. Detachment is not about running away or suppressing your emotions. It's about fully acknowledging them, processing them, and then releasing them. It's about stepping into a state where your peace is no longer dictated by whether or not they miss you. And the moment you reach that level, that's when they feel it the most, because they can no longer reach you in the way they once did. People hold on to a version of you that exists in their memory, a version shaped by their experiences with you, their expectations and their assumptions. That version is familiar, predictable, and within their control. But the greatest shift you can make, the most powerful response to any breakup, rejection, or disappointment, is to become unrecognizable to their past perception of you. This does not mean changing yourself to prove a point. It's not about forcing growth for revenge or validation. It's about evolving so deeply that the person they once knew no longer exists in the same emotional, mental, or energetic state. The behaviors they expected from you, over-explaining, seeking closure, waiting for them to return, no longer apply. The emotional triggers that once kept you stuck, doubt, insecurity, fear of abandonment, have dissolved. You have stepped into a completely new version of yourself, one that no longer fits the narrative they once placed you in. When they reach back, whether through curiosity, nostalgia, or an unconscious attempt to reclaim their influence, they expect to find you in the same place with the same emotions, responding in the same way. But when they do, they will come face to face with something they never expected. Distance, clarity, transformation. You are no longer seeking what they once withheld. You are no longer emotionally available in the way you once were. And that is when they feel the real loss, not just of you, but of the version of you they took for granted. Because what people fear most is not losing someone, it's realizing that person no longer exists in a way they can reach. You have outgrown their access. You have rewritten your story. You have become someone they can no longer define, predict, or control. And that is the moment they truly feel your absence. Because you are not just gone, you have evolved beyond the space they once held in your life. And once you do that, there is no going back. There is no need for explanations, no need to prove anything, no need to announce your growth. Because real transformation is not spoken, it is felt. When you evolve beyond who you once were, the shift in your energy is undeniable. It speaks louder than any words you could say, louder than any silence you could keep. Most people believe they need to send a message, craft the perfect response, or somehow make the other person see what they lost, but the truth is, words are empty when they come from a place of seeking validation. What truly creates an impact is when you no longer need to be seen, when your growth is so real, so embodied, that it cannot be ignored. You do not need to tell them you've changed. They will feel it when the version of you that once needed their attention is no longer there. They will notice it when their presence no longer affects your emotions. They will realize it when they try to reach for you in the same ways they used to, and find that you have risen to a level where their past influence no longer applies. True transformation happens when you shift from wanting them to acknowledge your growth to realizing you no longer care if they do. When your energy is no longer invested in proving something to them, but instead fully focused on expanding yourself, that is when you become truly magnetic. Not because you are trying to be, but because your presence radiates something different, something untouchable. Let your transformation be your response. Let your elevation be the answer. And when they finally recognize the change, it will be too late, not because you wanted revenge, but because you have simply outgrown the need for their validation. And that is the most powerful realization of all. No contact is not enough. Do this and let him feel it. There is a common mistake people make after a breakup. They believe that cutting contact is enough, that if they stop texting, stop calling, and disappear, something will shift. They wait for silence to do the work, but silence alone is weak if you are still emotionally tied to them. No contact is not the destination, it is only the doorway. What you do after stepping through it determines everything. You see, people don't just respond to absence, they respond to energy. If you are still vibrating at the frequency of loss, of longing, of hoping they notice, then you are still connected. They may not hear from you, but they can feel that on some level they still hold space in your mind. And as long as that remains, they have not truly lost you. The real shift happens when you detach, not just physically, but emotionally. When you no longer react, when you no longer need them to see your worth, when you no longer crave a response, that is when they feel it. Because the moment you step into your own power, the moment you rewrite your identity and evolve beyond their past perception of you, the dynamic changes. You are no longer someone waiting. You are no longer the same version of yourself that once tolerated their absence. And here's what most people don't realize. Transformation speaks louder than words. You don't need to announce your growth. You don't need to prove a point. You don't need to craft the perfect response. When you shift on a deep, fundamental level, it is felt. They may not understand why, but they will sense that something is different. They will look for you in the old places, emotionally, mentally, even physically, and realize that you are no longer there. That is when the loss becomes real. Not when you stop texting, not when you block them, not when you ignore their calls, but when they realize that the person they once knew, the person they once had access to, no longer exists in the way they remember. That is when they feel it. And by then, it will be too late. Because you won't just be gone, you will have outgrown them.